Welcome. I am Dean Martha Minow. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to Harvard Law School. Now, at this moment, we're not at Harvard Law School. We are indeed at Harvard University. So let me welcome you to Harvard University. As we enjoy this space, know that your life at Harvard Law School is also life at this great university. So attend university-wide lectures, courses, events, concerts, theater performances, many of them in this very room. Greeting you here, though, is also a way to underscore how the work that you do reaches beyond law, and to prompt you to connect, for example, with the university's Innovation Lab. I'm on its board. This year, I'm sponsoring a year-long challenge to promote innovation in food policy. Connect with the speakers, the colleagues, the excitement at the 11 other schools of this university. But it's also fitting that we meet here in this room with James Otis. Who's that? That's not the voice you heard without a person up here. That's this guy. In 1761, he actually spoke against the British writs of assistance which authorized customs house officers to search any house for smuggled goods. He's the one who said, "Taxation without representation is tyranny." He was one of 13 children. Maybe that's why he understood group behavior. He graduated from Harvard, and he also said, "It is a clear truth that those who every day barter away other men's liberty will soon care little for their own." Over there is Josiah Quincy. He was an outstanding lawyer and advocate for American independence, and nonetheless, he defended British soldiers in a trial held here in Boston after what was known as the Boston Massacre. British troops had killed 5 civilians after shooting into a crowd. Some things never change. Quincy and future U.S. President John Adams successfully argued that the soldiers were provoked and hence guilty at most of manslaughter. So think about this. At the brink of this nation's revolution, Quincy lent his talents both to the political struggle to create a new nation and to the law's respect for individuals defending those on the other side. He later became mayor of Boston, and the vibrant Quincy market, built without tax or debt, is an ongoing tribute to him. And he welcomes you as you study law at Harvard. But I hope our session today will be a little bit livelier than he is today. This building, as you know, is Memorial Hall. It was built to honor Harvard graduates who fought on both sides of the nation's Civil War. The building is known for its superior acoustics. It's good for concerts as well as classes, and notice the 180-degree view. You can see me, but you can also see one another. The speakers here have included Winston Churchill, Theodore Roosevelt, Martin Luther King Jr. I can see you. I'm going to call on you. Maybe. This is a preview of your classroom experiences at the law school. It's not a spectator sport. What you do in class is more like learning a musical instrument or playing a sport than watching a concert or a tournament. And even when you are not the one in the hot seat, you are in the game. W.H. Auden, the great poet, once said, "A professor is someone who talks in someone else's sleep." That's not what law professors do. Both in and out of the class, interaction is the name of the game, with faculty and with fellow students. And so I have a question for you, and it is not a rhetorical one. We're going to talk about it together here today. Should law, backed by the power of the government, promote forgiveness? Alternatively put, is it consistent with the rule of law for individuals, groups, or government to forgive wrongs? So in a minute, we're going to talk about it together. I'm going to give you a couple of contexts. Take a criminal charge for murder or for downloading documents in violation of the terms of use, or take a tort, a car accident, or forgiving the wrongdoer contradicts what the law demands, accountability and enforcement of norms. But forgiving the wrongdoer may repair social relationships or relieve victims of weighty resentment or permit a fresh start. Let's narrow in on a very particular problem. Should international law direct foreign creditors to forgive the debt of sovereign nations? A poor nation, let's imagine, that's incurred the debt when led by a despotic ruler who has spent the money on buildings of statues of himself, or on buying armaments for brutal police, or simply depositing the money in her own Swiss bank account. The despot now is replaced by a populist regime and faces demands for repaying the debt to the foreign creditors, other nations, other foreign banks. And now the usual rule in international law and civil law requires payment. And here I will slaughter some Latin, but that's what we do as lawyers. Pacta sunt servanda. Agreements must be kept is the rule. But not a few people in recent years have called for an exception. Forgive nations from having to repay debt of a prior regime when those debts are contrary to the interests of the society. Collected under the concept odious debt, the idea is that international law should not enforce sovereign debt payments when the debt was undertaken for purposes at odds of the interests of the people asked to repay them. The first problem here is what's the law? What's the source of the law? International law is particularly unusual. There is no government. There is no single government empowered to create a binding rule. So instead, we ask, are there enough nations and enough scholars who endorse this concept? And by scholars, guess what? That includes us. So that's why it matters. What we talk about, what we come to believe, will become an important contributor to the actual content of international law. So now for real, 3 related questions. 1, should international institutions and countries recognize the doctrine of odious debt, forgiving non-payment? 2, under what circumstances, if so? When the government incurring the debt is oppressive? When it's not acting in the interests of the people? When the creditor knows all of this? And 3, how would this work? What would not work about it? Would the creditors say, we forgive this and not that? Would the debtors say, you should forgive us? How would it work? Turn to your neighbors right now. Discuss this. 3 questions. Should there be international legal recognition of loan forgiveness? Under what circumstances? And how would it work? Pros and cons. Go to it. Okay, come on back. Lots of great conversations happening here. How many of you have encountered an issue like this in your country, in your life, ever? Okay. How many of you have ever asked for forgiveness, ever? All right. I'd like to hear some arguments against this kind of forgiveness of a debt of a country. Yes. Wait for the mic, it's coming your way.
So firstly, contracts need to be honored, and that's the reason why contracts are entered into. And secondly, we looked at some practical considerations. Now, if a rich financial institution or a rich country is lending money to a poorer country, a law like this will make it more difficult for the poor country to get access to funds. And so when the size of the market reduces, 2 things are going to happen. Firstly, because the size of the market is less, they may have to pay really high interest rates because the risk of the loan is very high now. And secondly, the rich country or the financial institution can actually dictate terms in terms of like how this country is going to manage funds. So because of these practical considerations?
Very good. These are very real difficulties that would immediately follow from recognizing a rule like this. So one thing you might do is call that a consequential argument. That's an argument about negative consequences. Even if there's a moral reason, it'll have these bad consequences. We could talk about whether you could come up with a regulatory regime to restrict those consequences, but that's going to be expensive too. Let's have an argument in favor of the forgiveness idea. There's one over here. Thank you.
So a lot of those consequences are a risk anyway, even if we don't introduce this, because a lot of these countries will just end up defaulting on a lot of the debt to begin with. On the other hand, though, it's maybe a good thing for financial lenders, especially if we were to hold this to a high standard to, let's say, countries that are, one, actively oppressing their people, but two, showing no substantive improvement in their well-being, countries like North Korea, Zimbabwe, rather than countries like China. Because then the financial institutions, when they're investigating these countries, can do full inquiries into, one, whether or not they're becoming better or not, which also reduces credit available to really terrible regimes which only use it to maintain their place in power.
So one thing that you've identified is that where we put the responsibility will affect who has an incentive to do investigation. And if we actually make it more likely that there will be forgiveness of some of these loans, then the creditors will have an incentive to do even more due diligence and to draw the kinds of distinctions that you're suggesting between regimes. Now, there's a problem about retrospective analysis versus prospective analysis, but that's that's the nub of your argument, and I can see its power. Another argument for why we should not support the development of an odious debt doctrine. Over here.
I think if you adopt that procedure, some of the rulers who are immoral and would want to use the foreign funds for his own benefit would continue to do it, and there would be no deterrence at all.
Okay, so there is just this problem that bad actors, if they're really, really bad, are not affected by the law. And let's follow this one a little bit further. What if there really was this kind of loan forgiveness available? Would that encourage more people to be bad actors? Would that encourage more rulers, even maybe not the terribly bad guys, to say, well, you know, worst comes to worst, we don't have to repay this? This is what's called moral hazard, right? You create a rule that actually invites people to engage in misconduct. That's a real risk here. Not only the failure to deter bad guys, but actually to invite more people to be bad guys. All right, I do want another argument, though, why we should recognize some kind of forgiveness here. You think about the countries that are really, really burdened by serious debt when there's been no benefit to these countries. There's a hand up here. And here comes a mic. Thank you.
Is there anyone from Argentina here?
Over here.
I would like to know what you think.
Yeah.
Because
this is a live issue right now.
Yeah, for those who don't know, there's a big issue. There's a hedge fund in New York who's refusing to reduce a loan it made to Argentina before the financial crisis, I believe.
Headed by a Harvard Law graduate.
Really? Interesting. So one thing that's happened is that Argentina has made this a political issue, a national issue, and has demonized the hedge fund as a vulture. So it's exacerbated political tensions, which is, I think, a huge problem in the current world when there's a lot of international conflict going on.
This dispute, not to get too deeply into it, actually also generated a Supreme Court of the United States decision just this past June that dealt with a very technical procedural issue, but it had the effect of strengthening the hands of the holdouts. And so what was otherwise negotiated as a deal with all of the other creditors has now fallen apart. And as a result, over the summer, Argentina has defaulted on its loans. That was not exactly an argument in favor of forgiveness. Well, one argument in favor of forgiveness is just a basic moral intuition that if we really posit that the despot is a bad guy, there's an unjust enrichment The creditors should not be able to secure loan repayment terms on the backs of people who are not going to be benefited. The creditors on this theory are unjustly enriched at the expense of ordinary people. On the other hand, there is probably no good way to avoid the concealment of information by regimes about whether or not the money is being used for a good purpose or not. There's a danger that forgiveness, as I said before, will encourage misconduct and reward those in the worst-run countries. But there's also a danger that if you don't have some kind of forgiveness, it will encourage the kind of behavior by creditors that produces these circumstances and indeed cycles. This is not the first time that Argentina has had this problem. And if they were really foreclosed from access to the international debt, maybe that would produce enough of an internal political change. Let's just focus for a minute on responsibility. Let's put all the consequences to the side. Who's going to be hurt long term by credit reduction terms or other kinds of consequential considerations, just right and wrong. Who's right and wrong in these circumstances? Who's right and wrong? We heard one argument for contracts should be enforced. There's a hand over here. And someone's coming to get you.
I think in the case where a nation has basically gotten rid of that dictator, it would be so wrong to basically keep the responsibility on that nation that is trying to hopefully build a democracy and trying to gain representation in their governance, that it is the responsibility of the international community to ensure that a democracy can be stabilized and can grow. And putting responsibility on that nation for a despotic ruler's actions is wrong.
It's really interesting because here the idea about who's right and wrong, it may be to separate out who's the country and who speaks for the country. So the prior ruler claimed to speak for the country. Now the country, the people, have stood up and said, no, you don't speak for us. And if the international community responds by saying, oh, you're stuck, that could actually topple this new regime. So that's a different view about right and wrong, and a view that actually requires the international community to look behind the name of the nation state to the people. And there are problems with that as well, but very, very interesting questions. Just to say a few more things about this, I'm passionate about it, I'm writing about it, I'm thinking about it, I'm really interested in your thoughts. There is a danger that if a doctrine of odious debt were recognized, again, international law itself is very hard to enforce. So even if this doctrine were recognized, even if we could figure out a way to implement it, some creditors would not follow it. And so we would have the rise of odious creditors who are willing to loan to irresponsible, despotic regimes outside of the scorn of the international community. That's a real risk as well. And it might actually have geopolitical destabilization consequences. It might produce, power in the countries that have wealth that don't care about these kinds of issues, while separating out those countries and international institutions that do. This issue, as I say, I'm writing about it. It's been a subject all over the world recently, but also going a long time in the past. There's a lot of precedent in discussions about it. No recognition of the actual doctrine, but Costa Rica, for example, in 1917, 1919, refused to honor debts. And that led to an international crisis that led to an arbitration by the then sitting Chief Justice of the United States, who allowed excuse from the loans. When Saddam Hussein was toppled, the new government called for forgiveness of the debt, and Iraqi economists and lawyers were joined by 100 members of the British Parliament and many members of the United States Congress in support of that forgiveness. Norway recently, unilaterally, forgave $80 million in payments on obligations owed to it by several countries based on its own assessment, its own investigation, that the loans should not have been given in the first place because they were being used for illegitimate purposes. There is no bankruptcy available for nations. That's part of the problem. And not that bankruptcy is something we all want to do, but the chance to start anew is actually a huge resource for individuals, for companies, for counties, for cities. Detroit, anyone from Detroit? Do you know what I'm talking about? To actually dig your way out, bankruptcy is a great opportunity. The United States Constitution protects the power of the Congress to authorize bankruptcy law. We don't have anything equivalent to that in international law. And without that, this problem is really, really difficult at the international level. Domestically, businesses often declare bankruptcy as a business strategy to break a union contract, to prioritize relationships. Individuals, of course, often also pursue bankruptcy in order to get out from under an underwater house in terms of an investment that no longer is even worth the value of the mortgage on the property. Taking a page from commercial debt collection companies, there are now nonprofit organizations that are using the market device of purchasing bad debt for pennies on the dollar and then forgiving it. So supporters of Occupy Wall Street started an organization called Rolling Jubilee. I checked today, as of today, this organization has raised $14 million to purchase debt, which is about, pennies on the debt. So it's forgiven a lot of ordinary people's medical debt, consumer debt, student loans. You might be interested in that one. Now, whether to forgive a wrong in many ways marks the border between law and morality. But as you will see, some of you know already well, this line between law and morality is not a line because these issues recur within the law as well. Pressing areas where forgiveness is currently at issue in the law include these. I've already alluded to the issue of the individuals who borrowed too much on their homes. Should their debt be forgiven? But what about the treatment of the bankers who did not pursue all of the protections, did not check when a mortgage was resold, pressed for the sale of subprime mortgages to people who could not purchase them? In some states, they may have violated laws. In some governments, they may have violated laws. Or should they be forgiven for taking the shortcuts in the paperwork, for pursuing the frenzy? Closer to home, when should student loans be forgiven? United States bankruptcy law currently does not allow forgiveness of student loans under bankruptcy, although it has in the past. Harvard Law School forgives loans for those who pursue public service jobs. Should forgiveness be tied to conditions of that nature? Let's switch gears and talk about pollution. Should polluters be forgiven? When BP's oil spill disaster occurred in 2010, still litigation ongoing about that, the largest ever accidental marine spill damaging wildlife and ecology of the region, local economies, the health and welfare of so many people. The British oil company apologized and has paid already upwards of $42 billion in criminal and civil settlements. But it's also said that it's enough. It doesn't want to pay anymore. Should it be forgiven? Has it done enough? Should government lawyers be forgiven if they give a professional opinion that later turns out to be wrong? How about if the professional opinion was that waterboarding could be used to interrogate a suspect? Should protesters of a police shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, of 18-year-old Michael Brown be forgiven when they violate the curfew? Should the police officer who shot Michael Brown be forgiven because he was under threat or thought he was? Should forgiveness be part of a victim or victim's family decision to participate in a sentencing in criminal action? To say, we do forgive this person who killed our son, or we don't forgive this person who committed rape. Should those kinds of statements affect the actual sentence to someone who's been convicted of a crime? In some legal systems, repentance by offenders, forgiveness by victims plays a pivotal role in the criminal justice process, and this option is debated in other places. For example, in the International Criminal Court, the first permanent criminal court in the world, it's authorized to pursue charges of genocide or crimes against humanity occurring anywhere in the world, except if the domestic nation has itself pursued a response. Unanswered in the treaty signed by 122 countries creating this court is whether the domestic response that's not a prosecution but a forgiveness ritual, or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like South Africa engaged in after its transition to democracy, whether that should be enough and prevent the International Criminal Court from itself pursuing its own prosecutions. A more mundane but persistent question is whether courts or agencies or, dare I say it, law professors should forgive a missed deadline in a required paper submission, a court filing, a student paper. Should I forgive some of you for being late today? Should a court forgive a late filing or allow the lateness to end the case? Whether to pursue forgiveness or mercy or excuse or a pragmatic decision just to move on engages lawyers across many fields. A kind of forgiveness is built into a lot of legal jobs. The prosecutor who has discretion whether or not to prosecute. Laws governing bankruptcy, amnesty. Legal institutions also create settings where victims can be empowered or further victimized, where wrongdoers can make amends or experience new wrongs. And what we discuss about these kinds of questions is not academic. It will change what happens. And what should happen depends on what rules have exceptions and what expectations people have. The gift of the rule of law is the chance to create predictability, security, free from whim and arbitrariness. But when should there be release from the strictures of the law because of forgiveness or some other notion of, in this case, it depends? By the way, when in doubt, the best answer in any law school classroom to a question to which you do not know the answer is, it depends. It depends on the circumstance. As I've said, this is a subject that I'm writing about. I'm really interested in it. I invite you to be in touch with me in person or by email with your thoughts about this subject. I know many of you have thoughts about it. But I also offer it to you as an example of the kinds of issues you'll engage with here. And all the faculty, every member of the faculty is involved in interesting, challenging issues and would love your help in your advice. It's a great privilege for me to have the chance to talk and learn with the extraordinary students of Harvard Law School. This is my 33rd year here. I started when I was 12. And you have begun to have a sense of why it is such a privilege here. You've started already to talk with one another. Let's turn now to talk about who are your fellow students. We have an amazing faculty and staff, but truly it is the students, past and present, who are the greatness of this school. The center of your learning, in fact, will be in discussion, argument, collaboration with one another. So who are you? We have here today students coming for master's and doctoral degrees, our LLM and SJD students. We have students transferring into the JD program from other law schools. We have exchange students from partner schools around the world, and we have students entering their first study of law as first-year students in the JD program. And let me tell you a little bit about yourselves and who's here. If you are an LLM or SJD student, please raise your hand. Okay, wow. You guys like to sit in front. Good. You are a tremendous group, and you're going to have the most fun ever. You're also going to drink a lot of coffee, but more on that. From 1,608 applications, 1,608 applications, you are a class of 182 students. You're citizens of 76 countries, from Afghanistan to Venezuela, and a majority of you are women. You include Fulbright scholars, law clerks from your country's Supreme Court or constitutional courts. 53 of you hold advanced degrees beyond your initial law degree. Nearly 3/4 of you have practiced or taught for 2 or more years. There are judges among you, prosecutors. 1/4 of the class, in fact, has already taught law. You have degrees in biotechnology, Chinese studies, engineering, environmental management, music, oceanography. You are published scholars, a licensed pharmacist, a medical doctor, an amateur gemologist, a former national swimming champion, a soccer player, a former police officer, a world-ranked fencer, film producer, radio TV host, a patent holder, several TV quiz show participants, and an avid cruciverbalist, which is a skilled crossword puzzle solver, an opera singer, a number of black belt martial artists. You play jazz trombone, clarinet, piano, guitar, violin, electric bass, Chinese zither, etc., etc. You sing opera, Carnatic music, and lyrical singing. One of you was a child homeless runaway. Many of you grew up in small villages, others in large cities. The LLM class includes an active duty U.S. Navy JAG officer, and I thank you for your service. And other public service positions held by members of the class include Director of General Revenue for Afghanistan, Economist for the Reserve Bank of Australia, Legal Advisor for the Office of the President of Brazil, Executive Director of Cambodia's Arbitration Council Foundation, Counsel for the Confédération des Syndicats Nations in Canada, Senior Advisor to the President of Chile, Antitrust Advisor to the Superintendent of Industry and Commerce in Colombia, former member of Iceland's Parliament, an asylum seekers legal representative in Slovenia. I can go on. You represent 69 jurisdictions from Argentina to Venezuela. No, I already said that, 76. And you are advocates for causes ranging from LGBT rights to environmental protection. And you will become an amazing resource to one another and to the entire law school community. We're thrilled to welcome the LLM class and SJDs. Please join me in applauding them. The SJDs I mentioned, I don't know if any of you are here. Is any SJD student here? If not, we can talk behind their backs. Okay, so there are 10 new doctoral candidates joining 52 already in residence, and they too have remarkable experiences and are worth getting to know, and many of them will become advisors and resources for you. Graduates of our LLM and SJD programs include distinguished leaders of business, government, architects of legal systems, accomplished legal scholars. I'm going to brag about a few. Radhika Kumaraswamy, hailing from Sri Lanka, recently stepped down from serving as Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict. She graduated from here in 1982, and she has been a superb advocate for human rights both in Sri Lanka and around the world. Mike Klein, class of 67, worked after his LLM degree for 35 years as a corporate lawyer, and then he turned to business and nonprofit ventures. He heads the Penn Faulkner Foundation, which gives awards for fiction writing, and he founded the Sunlight Project to fight corruption in the United States Congress, so he's a busy guy. Sam Pisar was a Holocaust survivor. He received his first law degree in Australia and his doctorate here, and he went on to work for the UN, for President John F. Kennedy, and to becoming one of France's most outstanding lawyers, indeed one of the leading trade lawyers in the world. Daniel Lipsik served as the Interior Minister and Minister of Justice of Slovakia. Sandili Nkobo served as the Chief Justice of South Africa's Constitutional Court. I saw him last spring. He's just been appointed after he stepped down from the court to investigate antitrust issues in the healthcare system in South Africa. We welcome here today an extremely strong group of transfer students, 35 students coming here from 25 law schools to pursue law degrees. Would you raise your hand if you're here? Any transfer student here? Nobody's raising their hand. We could talk about them too. No, okay. They are terrific. They are absolutely so impressive. Alumni of Teach for America, AmeriCorps. People worked in the U.S. Congress. They speak 17 languages. And they graduates of this school who came here as transfer students include Julie Kobrick, a recent graduate who recently finished clerking for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Dan Lowson, who runs the Civil Rights Project at the University of California, Los Angeles, and Caleb Weaver, a media strategist who right out of law school helped the Congressional Oversight Panel with a then little-known Harvard law professor named Elizabeth Warren, and went on to become the press secretary for the Department of Agriculture and now a media strategist around the world. Welcome to transfer students. We'll applaud them anyway. We have 12 exchange students at Harvard Law School this fall from the 18 institutions with which we have formal exchange. Partner institutions represented this year are in Brazil, Chile, China, United Kingdom, France, and Switzerland, and we are thrilled that you will be here learning and teaching us too. People coming here as exchange students have expertise in international arbitration, trust law, human rights, international humanitarian law, environmental law, tax, fiscal policy, trade. And I am absolutely thrilled to see you here, and I know that the rest of the crowd here will learn a lot from you and with you as well. And last but not least, among us are members of the entering JD class, affectionately known as 1Ls. Raise your hand if you're a 1L. Okay. There are 560 of you from 174 colleges and universities, 19 countries, 44 of the United States, plus the District of Columbia. Given that just about 6,000 students applied, you guys are really something. You really impressed us, and I congratulate you again. 50% of you are women, and that is the first time that we have had 50% women. %41% are students of color. 76% of the JD students actually engaged in work or graduate studies since college. 10% are not United States citizens. And the foreign countries from which you hail range from Belgium to Liberia, from New Zealand to Poland. You are Fulbright scholars, Truman scholars, Teach for America alumni, Peace Corps and AmeriCorps volunteers. Among the JD class are 11 with military service experience, both active service and veterans, 10 for the United States, and I'm glad to say from all of the branches of our armed forces, and 1 for South Korea. And let me personally thank you for your service. One else, you are marathon runners and triathletes, athletic coaches, opera singers, a rock band member, a Bollywood dancer, a trainer of dolphins, sharks, and sea lions, an NCAA Division I baseball player, an author of children's books. We have nationally ranked player in Magic the Gathering and a Legoland ride operator. You speak 46 languages, and that's not including 16 computer languages. You are songwriters, musicians, filmmakers, scuba divers, actors, set designers. There's a food critic. That's a good thing because there's several entrepreneurs who started restaurants. There's a welder, a woodworker, a yoga instructor. There are poker players. There's a collector of hyperinflationary banknotes. And there are veterans of wilderness survival training. That may be very useful in the weeks ahead. You all bring skills and strengths that will stand you in good stead and enrich the lives of the rest of the community. The entrepreneurs include the founder of a bakery-themed apparel company, an ice cream shop, an entity distributing High Plains custom wood arrows. One of you produced 125 military history podcasts. Others have created organizations to donate recycled computers to low-income schools in developing countries and to donate books to children in need. You have worked around the world for governments, in law offices, banks, retailers, consulting firms, think tanks, nonprofit organizations. We have an assistant biologist, a camp director, a documentary filmmaker. You've worked at a convenience store, a publishing house, a cattle ranch, and at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. There are people who've worked at Microsoft, Cisco, Google, Pratt Whitney, Panasonic, Breaking the Silence, the Scottish Parliament. That's an interesting combination. And 22 of you have been working in news and entertainment media companies, and someone also worked for Reporters Without Borders. You have served programs for children, for homeless people, for animals, advancing literacy, preventing suicide. You've worked at the White House, the U.S. Census Bureau, the Department of Treasury, the Federal Reserve, the United Nations, Barclays, Boston Consulting Group, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Make-A-Wish Foundation, New York Cares, Pride Toronto. You've been teachers. There is a firefighter and an emergency medical technician. That's really good for the rest of us. You dance, you act, you blog, you're musical, you sing a cappella and opera. You play baritone, horn, bass, cello, clarinet, drums, electric bass, electric guitar, euphonium, flute, French horn, guitar, harp, piano, saxophone, trumpet, viola, and violin, and the drummer with the rock band with 8 records, I Gotta Meet You. What happens to our JD students after HLS? Tiny sample. I'll describe a few. Paul Cappuccio is in the news this summer because he is the vice president and general counsel of Time Warner, which is a media conglomerate that is sort of in play for a hostile takeover, and he's not for it, and it's been interesting to watch him talk about that. After heading a law firm's telecom practice and serving as Assistant Deputy Attorney General at the United States Department of Justice, he found himself in this world, and he loves it. Victoria Dorfman works at a law firm where she's argued before all of the U.S. Courts of Appeals, and she successfully represented Congressman Boehner when he claimed a violation of the federal anti-eavesdropping statute. United States Brigadier General David Brames became the director of the Judge Advocate Corps of the United States Marine Corps, which he directed before he retired. And now he serves in private practice. Previously, he was a technical consultant for the Hollywood movie A Few Good Men. Justice Wilhelmina Wright was appointed not long ago to the Minnesota Supreme Court. She's the first African-American woman on that court. Lloyd Blankfein is chair and chief executive officer of the multinational investment banking firm Goldman Sachs. Samantha Power was my research assistant. She's now the United States ambassador to the United Nations. I just want to tell you one thing. She helped me write a book. I'm very proud of the book. She wrote a paper for me. Paper became a book. Her book got the Pulitzer Prize. Mine did not get the Pulitzer Prize. Justice Elena Kagan, another one of my students, now serving in the United States Supreme Court, following her deanship here. She'll be here next week teaching an intensive course, and she's agreed to a session with you. And I hope many of you will come. We'll have a lively Q&A with her. Past and present, we have extraordinary students. Current Chief Justice and 5 other justices of the United States Supreme Court, the First Lady, the President of the United States. Last presidential election, the other candidate for the United States presidency, and Governor Romney has agreed to come talk here this year. I'm very excited about that. Recent president of the World Bank, recently appointed justice on Australia's High Court, president of the Republic of China, CEOs of major companies around the world, the prime minister of the Tibetan exile government, directors of foundations, creators of local and global nonprofits, and these are not bragging points. Well, they're not just bragging points. Instead, I really mean to tell you this because these are reminders of what you can do with the help of this institution and with your talent and your passion and your drive. And it's a reminder of the responsibilities that you have and that we have together. You will wield power. You can do more good alone and together than any other group of law students anywhere in the world. And in light of all that you've heard, I will forgive you if you are experiencing a wave of what I like to call the imposter syndrome. Like, how did I get here exactly? And I'm going to tell you, we searched the world for you. We picked you, each one of you, because you dazzle us. You are talented, you are passionate, you're maybe a little bit driven. You will each make lives of meaning and accomplishment, and we picked you because you have the gifts to pursue your dreams, and your dreams can change the world. I do have a little bit of advice for you. There is one thing that would be unforgivable, and that's if you don't take full advantage of the opportunities here. And that means truly immersing. That means volunteering. That means taking risks, getting to know and collaborating deeply with your classmates. That means turning off the email while you're in class. That means going into the offices of the world-class faculty that have not as good social skills as you do. So break the ice. That means getting to know the remarkable staff of the Harvard Law School, the administrators, the librarians. You won't just be getting degrees here, you'll be earning them. And you'll work hard, but it should be hard. You'll work to analyze complicated social and legal problems. You will debate concrete cases. And I'll think you'll see why we have the reputation for caring so much about teaching. Indeed, we are famous for initiating the case method. Christopher Columbus Langdell, the dean, started the method for teaching the law through Socratic questions, discussing reports of actual cases, and we still use some of that method to this day. Reading the reasoning produced in hard cases offers the chance to link principles to facts, to reconstruct and critique prior judgments, and to examine how legal rules are embodied and tested in specific circumstances. You'll apply principles and rules to new problems well beyond courts. Your orientation's already given you a taste of this. You will develop your capacity to generate alternative solutions and consider the consequences of each path. Now, parodies of the Socratic method provide moments of high drama in movies, right? The Paper Chase, Legally Blonde, and you've heard it from me. Remember, the answer to a question is it depends. But then go on and speculate. On what does it depend? What more do you need to know? What are you assuming? What are the counter views? What's the effect of what you're saying? You will generate multiple characterizations of problems, and you'll debate, and you'll think again. You will stretch your imagination, and you'll engage in simulations and draft contract language and criticize policy proposals and apply economic and psychological research and tackle real and compelling issues that need your talents. Our hundreds of clinical pro bono and research opportunities will allow you to stretch your wings. Justice is one of the things I hope will be in your mind. Justice is the end of government, said James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. It is the end of civil society. It has and ever will be pursued until it is obtained or until liberty be lost in that pursuit, they said. When you have a random moment, wander into the second floor of the Wasserstein-Kaspersen Clinical Building, the WCC. There's a room that has quotations about justice from around the world, across time and space. And look at them, see what you think about them, see what's missing. We're still collecting because we have a web version. And here's two that I want to add to the web version I found this summer. Abigail Adams said, "We have too many high-sounding words and too few actions that correspond with them." Corzano Kino said, "Reconciliation should be accompanied by justice, otherwise it will not last." Little bit more advice, 3 assignments. First, make sure that you find at least one professor to get to know this year, and who will get to know you. Invite your professors for lunch, for coffee. Go to office hours. Ask what they're working on. Talk in and out of class. Volunteer to be a research assistant. We are here for you. Every one of the 110 faculty members and 157 visiting faculty members is here, not just because he or she is a superb scholar and teacher, but because these are people who believe in you and have chosen to work as mentors and interlocutors for the most gifted and motivated students we can find. We found you, now find your faculty connections. Second, really get to know and learn with one another. Do not stop taking notes in class when the professor stops talking and a student starts. Remember, some of those students will be professors soon, or justices, or who knows what. Go to meals with one another, keep the conversation going, and make lifelong friends. When I meet with alumni, I especially like meeting with those who come for their 50th reunions. They talk about visiting their classmates around the world and staying in touch for 50 years. The friendships forged during and after law school among our alums offer dynamic professional ties. That's a pretty good network, but also personal ties of great meaning. Our alumni tell me how they remember the beginning of their time here. They say sometimes it felt a little overwhelming. We know it's a challenge to navigate the legal structure when you're still learning the location of the buildings. Crucially, we also know that the legal system is not just about existing buildings, but it is the building blocks that allow us to order and reorder, to build new structures, to create new systems. We are eager for your ideas, for your creative reframing of issues, your solutions to problems. When you leave here, you will work in an inherited world, but you will also be inventors. You will make new organizations, new solutions, and we want you to make this place yours. And now, as I end this welcome, here's the 3rd assignment. Do not leave this room without introducing yourself to 2 people you haven't met yet. And I look forward to meeting you. I look forward to you introducing me to someone you've recently met. You came here to make a difference, and you are already making Harvard Law School anew. And so with thanks, I once more say, welcome to Harvard Law School.